Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. The Chinese heavyweight Zhang Zhilei remains in hospital following his fight with Jerry Forrest, having some concerning symptoms that have been explained online by an advisor of his. So as we know, Zhang fought Jerry Forrest on a DAZN card. He dropped Forrest 3 times in the first 3 rounds, looked $1 million, but failed to get Forrest out of there. And as the fight wore on, he just wilted badly. By the 5th round, he looked exhausted. By the end of the fight, he could barely stay on his feet. And I was surprised that he didn't get knocked down in either the 9th or 10th round. And he had to be escorted, assisted from the arena. So you sort of thought, geez, it's not like, he looks super exhausted. This is not good for him in his potential career. But the statement that's come out from Terry Lane, an advisor to Zhang, does sort of go into some of the background context and explain what's happening. So he says, and we'll get to this and then on to a few thoughts, because some of this I can make sense of, but some of it not so much. So he says, wow, what a roller coaster of a night. Zhilei Zhang started off better than we could have hoped for, with 3 knockdowns in the first 3 rounds. But credit and respect to the game Jerry Forrest, who battled back for a 10-round draw. It was apparent to us that Zhang was not himself in the second half of the fight. He had a good training camp that included high-quality sparring sessions, but in the locker room afterwards, we noticed some concerning symptoms and took Zhang to the hospital, where he will spend a couple of nights. The good news is that all of his neurological scans are clear. However, he is suffering from anemia, high enzyme levels, and low-level renal failure, which may have been caused by severe dehydration. We will address these issues, and Zhang Zhilei will be back, and we want to thank everyone for their concern and kind words of support that our team has received. We also want to send a special thank you to Matchroom for providing such wonderful support at this time. A little side note there, so I always get confused. Which way is it? Is it Zhang Zhilei or Zhilei Zhang? And actually his advisor there used both in the same statement. So make of that what you will. So Terry Lane posting that to his social media. Now, there's a couple of things about that make a lot of sense to me, because I thought Zhang, faded so badly that it wasn't funny, that it was such a concern to me that, because I've seen him do the 10 rounds before. So I'll say this to start off with. I've seen Zhang comfortably do 10 rounds before at a pretty decent clip. That was against Andrei Rudenko, and, this fight here didn't necessarily have, it wasn't exactly high octane all of the time. Jerry Forrest was throwing some big power shots, but there was a lot of clinching and tying up. There were some rounds where there wasn't a lot happening. But, I sort of, think I've seen him do that, those rounds before. And for that Rudenko fight, for example, he was actually 278 pounds, much heavier than he was for this one. He was 256. And that 256 was his lightest in about 4 years. So maybe coming in lighter, maybe that was some sort of detriment to him. But I guess there's a couple of questions here, because they talk about the anemia, the high enzyme levels, and they also talk about low-level renal failure, which they say could have been caused by severe dehydration. But the high enzyme levels and the anemia, that sort of stuff, I was thinking when I was reading that, it's like, isn't there like tests and stuff that you're doing in the lead up to a fight, blood work and such, that you're actually screening your fighter to ensure that, everything is tickety-boo, that they're not, sort of down on anything and something's, amiss, that sort of thing. I mean, certainly for the Junior Farr and Joseph Parker fight for the original date, it was blood work that picked up that something was wrong with Farr and he had to undergo some sort of procedure. But in this case, they're saying that he had a good camp, but they did notice in the second half of the fight that something's very off here. And they are trying to explain that away to some extent by saying that he was anemic, has high enzyme levels, and obviously the low-level renal failure. But that could have been brought about from the fight that they are suggesting. So I'm wondering, was there something that was missed in the lead-up to this fight, at least in terms of the way that he was assessed, blood tests, any sort of medical sort of aspect that somehow that was missed that could have been picked up, because the anemia thing, he wouldn't have just become anemic from the night of the fight, I imagine. That would surprise me. But I just wonder if something didn't happen that should have happened. But in a sense, I sort of, I do, because what I was saying before, I've seen Zhang do 10 rounds comfortably enough, and he was 20 pounds heavier. So to some extent, I sort of buy into that something wasn't quite right medically with Zhang that influenced his performance. Because that gas tank, as I think someone said, he looks like he's built like a tank, but he's got the gas tank of a lawnmower. And certainly that played out in that fight, because he didn't look good in that second half and was really lucky to make it out of the fight, and especially get away with the draw in the end, despite dominating the early stretch of that fight. Forrest, celebrated like he had won. But there's another sort of issue here. I mean, they talk about we'll address these issues, he'll be back, etc. He is 37 years old, soon to be 38. There is a case to say, look, we've seen, a massive stamina issue crop up in this fight. And even if they do tighten up on a few things and, something improves that he's not anemic, or the enzyme levels are, at a different level or whatever, more optimal levels, it's not to say that he still won't have a gas tank problem. I think anyone who's going to be fighting will think, okay, if I can survive the early rounds, and Zhang actually does have pop, and if he clips you, he does have power and it can hurt, and it can send you to the canvas, and as we saw against Devin Vargas, basically ended the night. But if you can hang in there and get to the second half of the fight and make him work, especially make him work when he doesn't want to. And Forrest was able to do that in stretches, make him work when he didn't want to, and he was sort of tying up with him. Everything that Forrest was doing in the end was having a sapping effect. It was just the shame for Forrest that he was also quite tired as well. He'd taken quite a bit of punishment in that fight. Even in some of those rounds where he was winning, he was still getting clipped, now and then. You could see it was still having an effect. If he had been a bit fresher, he would have taken full advantage of that tiring, wilting Zhilei Zhang in there. But Zhang, it's a massive red flag going forward, the gas tank. And I think even in an optimal situation, training camp's perfect, the body's perfect, he's an aging fighter. His stamina's not going to really get to any level where you go, wow, he can go 12 rounds at a really good clip. I think it's a case they're going to have to, especially with their fight plans, if they're preparing for 10 or 12 rounds, they're really going to have to just work in spots, and, he's not going to be able to just exert, I think some of what happened in there, rounds 2 and round 3, where he thought he might be able to get him out of there, maybe he expended a little bit more than he probably should have, but that ultimately wasn't the problem. He's got, his stamina is an issue, and I think it's probably only going to get worse over time as he approaches 40. And it's a shame for him, because if he had been brought along 5 or 6 years ago and had been in a better position, we could have seen him in some pretty meaningful fights, well before now. But it feels like he's almost missed his mark, that it was a little too late, bearing in mind he won an Olympic silver medal all the way back in 2008. Probably should have gone pro after that, probably should have actually built his name, and obviously he got into a promotional contract as well. He was there with Rock Nation, didn't help him. He's now with Matchroom, but it feels like it's almost too late, and that fight did very little for him. And even, some people may look at this statement and go, it's just an excuse. He had a poor performance, the gas tank was empty, and he was lucky to hold on. Some people will see it that way. And to some extent, I can't blame them as well, because this could be a little bit of smoke and mirrors. And after the sort of pasting he ended up taking in the second half of the fight, it isn't surprising that he had to go to hospital and is still there. But low-level renal failure, that's not good to hear. Anemic, and also high enzyme levels. There's a bit going on there, and even if things were optimal, I'm not sure how good that gas tank would have been. I think he is one of these guys that if he does empty the tank to any extent, he's in trouble. He didn't get a second wind in that one. But what do you make of this? A statement by Terry Lane, advisor to Zhang Zhilei. Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.